Just be that. Okay. Go right. We are back. We're back.
Hey, we're back. All right. Hey, everybody. I didn't go anywhere. Hopefully, maybe you just had a chance to freshen your drink. Maybe pop that popcorn and get it out of the microwave and get settled into your most comfortable chair for this easy walk through historic Charleston. Let's fixed elements. Let's get out there and try to do some stuff. Let's take a walk up to the Exchange Building, my favorite historic building here in the city. We've got White Point, we've got Joe Reilly Memorial Park here along the waterfront, and we'll just walk our way up Exchange Street to the Exchange Building and take a look at it. As I mentioned, Charleston founded in 1670. Charleston founded in 1670 as an English colony, and as an English colony, we found ourselves being populated initially by about 200 settlers that made their way here in the fall of 1669, left Portsmouth, England, and made their way here. They didn't come here directly. These settlers originally took a trip down the west coast of Europe, went down to the island colonial capital of the British in the Caribbean, Barbados. And when they arrived in Barbados, they had a couple of problems. One of the three vessels that had left Portsmouth found itself losing its mooring, lost anchorage, broke up on some reefs, and then they found themselves having to rebuild and kind of redirect. And so they assembled themselves, took off again, landed here in April of 1670. Again, a lot of problems associated with them getting here. One of the ships ended up finding itself in Bermuda. One of the ships unfortunately hit a reef in the Bahamas. And finally, in April of 1670, we found the frigate Carolina arriving here in Charleston Harbor. Now, when the settlers arrived here, they didn't arrive specifically on the spot that we're standing on. They didn't arrive here on the peninsula. About 5 miles to the north and west of us, there was a location that they called Albemarle Point. And today, Albemarle Point is a part of our state parks network, and it offers about 60 acres of high ground on the western banks of the Ashley River. And this location today has a beautiful recreation of that old original settlement. You can find biking trails, hiking trails, and it's just a wonderful way to have the opportunity to see what things looked like. Now, for about 10 years, we found those settlers desiring to set up their permanent established colony here on the peninsula. For about 10 years, they started conducting surveys. They started to map out streets, they started to map out properties, and ultimately found themselves with about 62 acres of high ground that they would call their permanent home. About 1680 is when all this took place.
Matthias, actually it's my brother, he's reached out from Rochester. He said hello.
Hi Matthias, how are you, buddy?
And Teague is back, and she's a big supporter. Helped me make it through Kyoto this morning.
Hey, so that was a pretty fascinating visit to Kyoto.
She sends you warm wishes from Canada.
Well, thank you very much. I love Canada. Wanted to take a moment to talk about my favorite historic building here in the city. It's probably my favorite secular building here in town. The old Provost Exchange and Dungeon. We find that the Exchange Building, completed in 1771, represents the very last official British building built on American soil. The very last building built by the British on American soil, completed in 1771, just 4 years prior to the outbreak of the American Revolution. This location was also one of the 4 locations in the United States where the U.S. Constitution was ratified. Places like Faneuil Hall up in Boston, Independence Hall in Philadelphia, the State House in Annapolis, Maryland, and here were the 4 locations in the country where the Constitution was ratified. And if that doesn't make it historically important, I don't know what will. And what we're seeing here is actually the pretty side of the building. This is the pretty side of the building because when you came to Charleston by the Sea, it would stand as the most opulent structure on the city's skyline. Fun fact for you is that about 60% of all of the land that you see that makes up Charleston today, approximately 60% of all of that land is man-made. We filled in low-lying marshy areas, tidal creeks, all to expand and grow the footprint of the city. And when we did this, we didn't do a particularly good job. We didn't have a whole lot of civil engineering going on back then. And today we're finding a lot of this man-made land is settling, and we're finding that in combination with rising seas is causing us a lot of problems in the form of flooding. Maybe have a thunderstorm parked overhead, God forbid any kind of tropical activity. And yeah, we see some flooding taking place here in the city on a regular basis. A colleague of mine, Christina Butler, has just published a fantastic book called The Low Country at High Tide, and it documents all of these issues and the history of all this infilling. And so if you have a chance to, fan of civil engineering, if you're a fan of Charleston, pick up a copy of The Low Country at High Tide. You won't be disappointed. It's an amazing read. But this, yes, the actual pretty side of the building. It gets its name, the Exchange Building, because if we take a look at the pediment there, we've got that circular window, and beneath it are sheaves of rice. Rice representing number one commodity that was generated here. And it gets its name, the Exchange Building, is back in the 1700s. We didn't have a sophisticated system of banking. So we had a mercantile system where essentially things were exchanged on paper. If I were going to export a shipload of rice, I wouldn't necessarily get paid in cash or currency. I'd get paid in trade. So hence the name. Dug below that Provost dungeon would see pirates imprisoned in 1718, and then later when the British occupied the city during the American Revolution, about 60 American prisoners, American patriots imprisoned in that Provost dungeon. If you take a tour of the building, just as beautiful on the inside as the outside, and it's a Georgian style of architecture, an architectural style that was popular from about 1700 up until about 1790, and we found that once we kicked the British out, we really weren't employing their style of architecture too much any longer, so it kind of makes a lot of sense.
Steve Bailey sends reassurance saying you're doing a great job.
Well, thank you, Steve, a colleague of mine that works with Walks of Charleston and Low Country Walking Tours.
Jill also lets us know it is up on Facebook. Thank you, Jill, for confirming that. It's always good to know that we're streaming in the right place. Sorry for the confusion before.
Jill's an MVP. Thank you very much.
Emmanuel says hello from New York.
Hello, Emmanuel. Kristen
Anderson Humphreys is enjoying your tour from Sonoma County, California.
What a beautiful part of the world that is.
And Carrie Hallis says hello from Massachusetts.
Hey, Carrie. Beautiful. That's my maternal ancestral home ground up there. So cool stuff. We're looking out onto Broad Street, the widest street in the city here. Broad Street, if you notice at the about 2 blocks to the west of us, white church steeple that is St. Michael's Church. St. Michael's, originally called the English Church for the Anglican Church, the Church of England, represents the western boundary of our old walled city. Charleston, a walled city, one of 3 in North America, first established by the Spanish down in St. Augustine, the second by the French up in Quebec, and the third here. And this wall for the walled city contained about 62 acres of high ground. Look at that beautiful Edgewater passing by. Well, I've got some boat envy right now.
Whoa, that's some horsepower.
That's there. Some fiberglass. So one of 3 walled cities, and this wall remained in place up until right about 1720, started tearing that wall down in order to expand and grow the footprint of the city. So St. Michael's Church stood right at the edge of the western wall there. About a quarter mile to the north of us where the market stands today, where the northern wall was located. About a quarter mile to the south of us, kind of where the yacht club stands, that's where the northern wall was located. Right across the street here, this beautiful brownstone that we're checking out, this beautiful brownstone, it's a former bank, and we know it's a bank by simply looking at the doors. Anytime we see this ornamental cast ironwork on the doors of a building, we know it was a bank. Protected that glass on the other side. This building, constructed in 1853 out of Connecticut brownstone, is in a Renaissance revival style of architecture, and it served as a bank up until the Civil War. During the Civil War, it became the treasury for the state of South Carolina. Each Confederate state maintained its own treasury. each Confederate state printed its own currency. So this was the Treasury for the state of South Carolina. Following the war, it was acquired by a rather notable blockade runner, a gentleman by the name of George Trenholm. And during the Confederacy, he was the treasurer of the Confederacy. 1874, it was acquired by another former blockade runner, a gentleman by the name of George Walton Williams. So these guys made a lot of money during the war and used it to buy things like banks.
Mark says hello from Armenia.
Wow, holy cow.
That's correct.
That's pretty cool.
Pat Cassidy is sending greetings from Lima, Peru.
Oh, have a pisma for me, Pat.
And Suzanne is expressing boat envy for Captain Jim.
That's the good stuff there. So this today, the former bank has a private residence up there on the 3rd floor. The 2nd story is a disused event space today. And the 1st floor, unfortunately, was one of the first victims of the pandemic. There was a lovely cafe that operated on the 1st floor, and unfortunately they couldn't make it, so they're shuttered. If you notice, there's a little yellow, maybe it's hard to see from our perspective. We'll eventually cross the street there, I hope. You can see a little yellow sign in the window. That's for our Board of Architectural Review. It's kind of like a homeowners association on steroids here. That little sign, Board of Architectural Review, says that they're looking to make some changes to the building. So we find that this former restaurant, the former cafe, is going to get a second lease on life here, likely in the end of the spring into the summer, and it's going to be a French bistro. So hey, get yourself some steak frites.
Thank you guys all for commenting. Because we had a little bit of a restart before, your comments right now are helping tell the Facebook and YouTube algorithms that we weren't trying to like spam their system or something. You're giving us that momentum, and it really, really helps. Hi, Mom, from New York. Beautiful. Always nice. Hey, Mark, na, schönen Abend in Schweiz. Mark Wieland saying hello to us from Switzerland. And Stephen and Yvonne Falconer from Algoma Mills, Ontario, saying
Algoma,
hi.
yeah, it's beautiful up there in Canada.
Mike Goldberg's just over in Mount Pleasant saying hi. And Sol, Sol's a repeat for us, and she's saying hi from Patagonia, Argentina. Always good to have her back too.
Fantastic. Well, let's go down the steps here and walk down East Bay Street.
Awesome.
Wanted to take a look at the structure here on the corner, and we have what's known as Coates Row, a commercial building from 1788 that was built essentially right on the foundation of the old wall that ran right along East Bay Street. Coates Row, not necessarily the original structure that was here. Several buildings have occupied this space. Skip, how are you doing, buddy? Good to see you. We find that this was the 3rd incarnation of structures built here. First were wood, second found themselves brick, torn down, and then Coates Row built here. In the center of Coates Row, there was a French coffee house, later called the Jacobin Club. Around 1790, French folks living here were in support of the French Revolution, and this is where they would meet. At the end, there was a silversmith, and behind me was the old tavern. And the tavern has always been, as I like to say, in the spirit of spirits. Sailors would come here to drop anchor and have a good time, and we would have found it ever since it started opening up here when that wall came down as a tavern. 1788, when Coates Row was established here, this was known as Harold's Tavern. And we found that it operated as a tavern up until Prohibition. When Prohibition swept the land in 1920, it was largely bypassed here in Charleston. The mayor, the city council, police officials didn't enforce the rules of Prohibition. We had rum runners coming up from the Bahamas bringing us this contraband, and the liquor flowed. In 1928, a New York Times columnist came to town, and he reported that Charleston was sopping, wringing wet with alcohol. So it was just basically a speed bump on our social scene. Well, once Prohibition ended in 1933, we found that the state of South Carolina yesterday, just like today, was a pretty conservative outfit. And so the state of South Carolina, its legislators didn't want to find these newly reopened liquor stores with big signs on the sides of walls saying liquor, liquor, liquor. So they came up with a more subliminal method of advertising. And today, by law in the state of South Carolina, any liquor store must display these 3 red dots. And here we call these the 3 suns. And it stands for sunup, sundown, and Sunday, meaning you can only purchase between sunup and sundown and never on a Sunday. So today's Sunday. Yep, Scott gets the day off. Scott, the owner, gets to do whatever Scott likes to do. Certainly not tending to the cash register here at the old tavern. But yeah, change does take place. We'll just be it a little bit slowly here. Sunday brunch around here prior to 1996, yeah, pretty boring. Didn't get your Bloody Marys and mimosas like we always like to.
Real quick, we had just a couple of the people joining us. Always nice to say hi to them and thank them for saying hi to us back. Liliana saying hello from Buenos Aires.
Beautiful.
Ronald Kaplan from Philadelphia says that despite living in Philadelphia, Charleston is his favorite city.
Well, Philadelphia is an amazing city with what wonderful history it holds.
Kai saying hello from Fort Myers, Florida. And Teague.
Get him, Tiger.
Teague says, looks so beautiful.
It does look beautiful. Hey, ladies, how are you?
And Dora Izella is saying hello from Mexico.
Well, bienvenido. Excellent, wonderful stuff. I'm glad you all are here. I'm Chris. This is all part of the big party here. We are now in a rather familiar section of the city. This location that we're presently upon is known as Rainbow Row. And Rainbow Row gets its name for these beautiful pastel-colored buildings behind me here. Rainbow Row hasn't always been as photogenic as it appears today. Rainbow Row was actually an active working waterfront. If we take a look at the street sign, it tells us an awful lot of the story here. Boyce's Wharf. This is where sailing ships and later steamships arrived. And that means all of these buildings across the street were in the service of the ships and the men who are on them. 1918, our local newspaper described this area as a slum. So it really wasn't a very nice place to be at all. And it all started to make a major change and a major transformation courtesy of a powerhouse of a preservationist and 30 of her like-minded friends. There was a lady who emerged onto the scene by the name of Susan Pringle Frost. And Susan Pringle Frost was, by today's standards, a lady who was taking a shotgun to a glass ceiling and just blowing holes in it. She was Charleston's very first female licensed real estate agent. She was also the federal court's very first female court stenographer. She was suffragette, and there was no challenge that she didn't see that she didn't want to overcome. She was seeing in the 19-teens and the early 1920s a lot of our historic buildings being torn down in the name of progress. And you can think of things like gas stations and grocery stores replacing these big, beautiful mansions. And this upset her. And she and 30 like-minded friends, these 30 ladies, picked up the challenge of preserving our beautiful historic structures. Susan Pringle Frost, maybe if you're at home and you have your web browser open, click on the Wikipedia page, look up Susan Pringle Frost, and you'll see a lady that looks kind of similar to Winston Churchill. So you can kind of figure out how she was able to twist the arms of the mayor and the city council to come up with some zoning ordinances with some teeth in them. They called this the Charleston Code, and elements of these protective zoning ordinances were borrowed by other cities like Philadelphia and New Orleans, found cities like Savannah taking advantage of the work that Charleston did in preserving its buildings to work on their own structures. Now, as they were working with individual buildings, they decided that they were going to change their strategy in the 1930s. Rainbow Row here was a slum. It was falling apart. Certain amount of these structures were slated for demolition. And one of the members of the club, a couple by the name of Lucy and Lionel Legge purchased the pink house right across the street. They purchased this house townhouse that was constructed in 1731, purchased this house for a song, and they were essentially homesteaders along this block. It had fallen into disrepair. It was a terrible place to live, and they brought some respectability and stability. You see, Mr. Legge wasn't happened to be a regular guy. He was a judge, and he just wasn't a plain old ordinary judge. He was a judge that sat on the South Carolina Supreme Court, and when the justice moves onto the street, brings a sense of respectability and stability. It was kind of like the first domino to fall. And when you ever take a look at maybe the image of Rainbow Row in a travel brochure, or maybe you look at Rainbow Row on the accommodations page for the hotel that you're seeking to book, just don't think of it as a group of pretty buildings. Really think of it as the birthplace of the preservation movement here in the city. Truthfully, Susan Pringle Frost did a fantastic job in my benefit, because I'd be talking about glass and steel buildings all day long, and that would be a really boring tour. I've got a little shrine at my house with a picture of Susan Pringle Frost, got some candles going and a little effigy for her. But truly, what a remarkable lady, and what an incredible presence she had. They formed this organization in 1920 called the Society for the Preservation of Old Dwellings, America's very first preservation organization. Let's continue to walk down East Bay Street here, and we can still check out some of these houses across the street here. From a historical perspective, it gets the designation of being the longest continually operating structure of row houses in a pre-Revolutionary War Georgian style of architecture. That's a mouthful to say, but we just know it as the birthplace of the preservation movement. A lot of people tend to ask me, hey, Jim, what's the value of these properties? Well, they go anywhere between about $3 million to about $5 million, average listing price somewhere about $3.25. We also find another question that's rather frequently asked is, hey, if I buy one of these houses, can I change the color? And the short answer is yes. There's a common misnomer, this sort of urban legend, this myth that you can't paint your house once it's already been painted an established color. There's this other sort of falsehood that floats around saying that, oh, there's a palette of 72 colors from which you can choose to paint your houses. The reality is you can paint your house whatever color you want. I think where this sort of storyline of 72 colors comes from is that Sherwin-Williams, in conjunction with the historic Charleston Foundation, came up with this palette of colors that was basically a marketing device to sell paint. And so, you know, these paint colors are really pretty, and it does a good job for us.
Mark T. Holmes says hello from Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
Hey, Tar Heel.
Loving your city.
Love it.
And Teague asked a question, which is, thanks Teague again for asking questions. You're so awesome to be feeding us info or questions into the chat. It really helps us a ton. Teague asks, is there one or two beautiful heritage hotels in Charleston that you might suggest a visitor to stay at? Maybe one with an interesting history.
Sure. Probably a more modern hotel that is going to give you a good glimpse to the past is the beautiful Mills House Hotel. Mills House Hotel located right on Meeting Street at the intersection of Meeting and Queen Street. The Mills House Hotel was at risk of burning to the ground. There was a major fire that swept through the city in December of 1861, just 9 months after the beginning of the Civil War. And a guest of the hotel happened to be General Robert E. Lee. General Robert E. Lee used his leadership skills to galvanize all of the guests at the hotel to take their bed sheets, their linens, their draperies, soak them in water, place them up against the facade of the building in order to prevent that fire from consuming the entire Mills House Hotel. So wow, great job, General Lee. Probably another accommodation that you'd like to explore will be some of the network of bed and breakfasts that we have here in this city. There's a number of bed and breakfasts that are located within the historic district itself. Just an absolute charming glimpse to the past. It's almost like staying with an old friend. So check out some B&Bs here in the city and you won't be disappointed. Here I'm standing in front of a piece of masonry that represents a hunk of the old city wall. Mentioned that Charleston was one of 3 walled cities in North America. The wall that ran up and down East Bay Street was discovered when they were doing some utility work here, so decided to put it on display. Why not? So here it is, standing in its glory. Now the wall that ran up and down East Bay Street here was essentially a seawall. It was keeping the water on this side, keeping the land on this side, and it wasn't this big castle-like formidable Game of Thrones type of a thing. It was basically just keeping the water on one side. There's a beautiful map here that I'd like to direct you towards. This interesting map is called the Crisp Map. It's from 1711, and the Crisp Map does a really great job in showing us exactly what this old walled city looked like. Where we met, we were talking about the Half Moon Battery, the site of the captain of the guard and the barracks, today where the old exchange building and the Provost dungeon exists. And you can see by this map here, everything to the east of East Bay Street, everything behind me was originally all water. This was waterfront property. Confines of the city the wall contained about 62 acres of high ground. And more importantly, we saw what was on the other side of the wall. Not a whole lot of anything. It was just basically some areas to pasture your animals, maybe grow some vegetables. Curiously enough, the northern wall and the southern wall lied adjacent to bodies of water, tidal creeks. Really difficult for your enemies to cross over a tidal creek in order to attack your wall. So strategically, it was a nice element to have in place. The southern wall, western wall, northern wall, they were all made out of earthwork. So they took logs, tree stumps, dirt, just simply piled it up about 10 to 15 feet high, and that's exactly how these walls were made. So it really wasn't this big sort of castle-like defense. Easy to come down, to fill in those bodies of water. Daniel Creek is where the market stands today. To the south of us, Vanderhorst Creek is where Water Street is located. So filled in these low-lying marshy areas in order to expand and grow the footprint of our city. I think right now we're going to take a trip off of East Bay Street. We're going to walk down one of the more charming streets in the city here, Trad Street, check it out and get to see some of the beauty that lies there. Well, Chris, you ready to go?
Let's do it.
Okay.
You've got a couple more hellos.
I like hellos.
Can't stop loving what you're doing.
Oh, I love that.
Peter Hicks
Oh.
says, hey.
Pete, I love that you joined me today. When I was a cadet at the Citadel, Pete Hicks was a year in front of me. He was a cadre sergeant. He was absolutely fantastic. He was just a great guy that actually helped me get through that institution, the Citadel.
Jocelyn says, hello from Larry and Linda, watching with brother Ed and Jocelyn from Scenario, Ontario, Canada.
Sonia, yes, my sister-in-law, Jocelyn. Mwah.
Very cool.
Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for the hotel description.
Thank you.
And Colleen, my cousin, is jealous of the warmer weather. I think we've got a big family contingent with us.
I think this is really cool.
Nice.
Colleen, where's Colleen from?
Colleen is living in Brooklyn, New York.
Fantastic. So, Colleen, you probably know about Water Street that's located in Lower Manhattan, Water Street that's along the East River. Well, that Water Street was, again, waterfront property, simply started filling in the area to the east of Water Street, and that's all man-made land, just like here.
I actually used to live on the corner of Wall and Water.
No way! What a cool spot.
I was home for a little while.
Hanging out in McSorley's, were you?
Well, it's not. It's close enough. That's really overpriced here. Ann Gage says hi from Illinois.
Beautiful cousin, Ann. How are you?
Belisa Rodriguez is Micheal's wife, and love watching this. You're doing great. Jim, you're getting a lot of fan club here, man.
I'm telling you what, I feel it. I'm feeling the love. The endorphins are flowing.
Thank you guys for all the comments. Your comments are going to help more people see this video and let more people hear Jim's stories, which is going to give joy and pleasure in their lives as well as in Jim's. So,
absolutely. We're walking down Trad Street here, and Trad Street is an absolute fascinating street in the city. It's one of my favorite streets to walk and to explore. Trad Street is unique in the fact that it's the only street in the city that completely bisects our peninsula. It runs completely from river to river. It goes from the Cooper River on the east side over to the Ashley River on the west side, and it runs exactly 1 mile between these two rivers, exactly 1 mile. So folks like to maybe get some exercise in, do a morning jog. You can run the length of Trad Street, and maybe you've gone exactly 1 mile and kind of pace your run that way. Trad Street, absolutely fascinating in the fact that if you think about it, this old walled city, the 62 acres of high ground, it means that most of the buildings that are located between East Bay Street and Meeting Street are some of the oldest in the city. Once you go west and you cross over Meeting Street, those homes are from the late 1700s into the 1800s. Keep going west, cross over Logan Street, and all of those homes are from the 1900s. So you're basically walking through about 300 years of history from one length of Trad Street over to the other. So if that isn't interesting, I don't know what is. I've got a commercial building here behind me. At least it used to be a commercial building. Today it's a private residence. And how do I know this is a commercial building? Well, it has a set of double doors. Anytime you see a set of double doors here on a building in this historic district, just know that you're taking a look at a business. Double door means business. This was the home to the Ewing accounting firm. And if I wanted my books done, hey, tax time is right around the corner. If I wanted my books done, I'd drop them off with Mr. Ewing through this set of double doors. Now, if I wanted to pay a social call on Mr. Ewing, you know, at the end of the day, if I wanted to break out the Scrabble board and play a game of Scrabble, I wouldn't go through this front door because this was just where his office was located. If I wanted to visit the family, you know, maybe have happy hour with them, break out that Trivial Pursuit, I'd go through the gate here, and on the side of the house, there's another entrance, and that's how you would get into the residential portion of the home. So they maintained a separation of their work lives and their professional lives. So kind of like today, you got a home office. You don't have your home office set up right there in the middle of your dining room. You've got your home office set up someplace away that isn't going to disturb your family or have your family disturb you.
Rob Jones sends greetings from Greenwood, South Carolina.
Rob, how are you, sir?
And Francis asks, what are these circles on the building?
These circles are some really cool elements, and if you notice, it's got a bit of a tongue twister as the name, the Carolopolis Award. Try to say that 3 times fast. The element of Carol comes from the Latin for Charles. King Charles II, well, he was the King of England when we showed up here in 1670, and the Latin for Charles is Carolus. So we have our name for our colony, Carolina, later the state, South Carolina, was all derived from that Latin for Charles. Opolis, well, that's going to be Greek for city, and so we have Annapolis, Maryland, yeah, that's Anna's town, and here we have Charlestown. So we kicked the British out. And we said, hey, we don't need to honor Charles anymore, so we consolidated that name and called ourselves Charlestown. Now, this house was awarded its award in 1985 by the Preservation Society of Charleston. And that old Susan Pringle Frost organization, the Society for the Preservation of Old Dwellings, well, they decided in 1950 that their name was getting a little old-fashioned and archaic. It is a bit of a mouthful, to be honest with you. So they decided to go through a rebranding, and the rebranding was the Preservation Society of Charleston. In 1954, they started to give out these medallions to homeowners who renovated, brought their homes to be historically correct, culturally correct in their presentation. Ever since 1950, the Preservation Society has given out 1,420 of these little medallions. And they're certainly a nice thing to have. Tend to raise the resale value of your property anywhere between 10 15%. So not a bad thing to have, especially if you're dealing with a house that's worth a couple of $1 million.
Yeah. Teague says the balcony is a dream.
Oh, the balcony, can we go back and talk about it for a sec?
Sure.
Sure. So this balcony, rounded in its appearance, is known as a Juliet balcony. Other situations, we'll find a rectangular balcony. And if you think about it, as we started to see a change in fashion, we started to see a change in this type of balcony in order to accommodate the ladies that were wearing these big fancy hoop skirts. So prior to the Revolutionary War, most of the ladies' dresses hung vertically right off of their bodies. And then post-Revolutionary War, a little bit more prosperity was seen here, a little more wealth, and these fancy hoop skirts became de rigueur, and they had to accommodate the balconies in order to accommodate those dresses so they wouldn't be compromised.
Very cool. Ken asks, Jim, are there preservation rules for the interior of these buildings?
In some certain circumstances there are. The complementary historic preservation organization here is called the Historic Charleston Foundation. There are credits, tax credits for easements made for the interior of your home. When you're renovating your house, the Board of Architectural Review, sort of this body that's like a homeowners association on steroids, they maintain that you must maintain 50% of the interior when possible. So if you have a big fire, if there's been a lot of water damage or something like that, there's some things that can't be avoided. But for the most part, we find that a lot of the contractors, architects, builders, they know what they're working with. We've got a band of professionals here that know exactly what the story is and the hoops they have to jump through to maintain.
Awesome. Hale Holzman says, look at those flowers.
Look at those beautiful flowers.
And
Hey,
then
Hale,
also,
that's
Daniel
my beautiful,
says, wonderful tour.
my beautiful bride. Hey,
Ah.
Hale. Hi, sweetie.
Ah.
We happen to be standing here at a rather interesting intersection. We're here at the intersection of Trad Street and Church Street. Trad Street goes east and west. Church Street goes north and south. And this intersection represents the highest point of elevation south of Broad Street into our historic district. Right now, we're standing at a whopping 14 feet above sea level. 14 feet above sea level. That's considered high ground. Ultimately, here on the peninsula, the highest point of elevation, 22 feet above sea level. They call this area the Low Country for justifiable reason. Not a whole lot of high ground here. If you really want to test your stamina, take a trip across the Cooper River, cross over the Cooper River Bridge into the bedroom community of Mount Pleasant, and you'll find that the mountain in Mount Pleasant is a whole whopping 32 feet above sea level. I'm still in training to make that ascent. I'm no Sir Edmund Hillary. I need to get my Sherpa, need to line up my oxygen reserves if I'm going to make that ascent up Mount Pleasant. Maybe I'll get around to it in May or something like that. But for now, I got to stick to these low-lying areas. Now, I mentioned that we're here at 14 feet above sea level, and we found that right on the corner here, there was a Frenchman by the name of Danjou who established in 1790 a grocery here. Has this set of double doors, so of course we know it was a commercial business. Danjou took advantage of a fire that swept through this neighborhood in 1789, destroyed the wooden building that stood here previously, and constructed this building made out of bricks. And Danjou was basically following the protocol established by the Three Little Pigs, right? You go from straw to wood to brick, and he was just manifesting that destiny there. It's a pretty good idea to have your home built out of bricks in a city that's subject to fire. Now, taking advantage of the high ground here, Danjou could build something similar to a basement. You open up these metal grates, open up the hatches, go down the steps below, and you're going to find yourselves in about as close to a facsimile of a basement that you're going to find here in the city. In addition to having not a lot of high ground, we do have a very high water table. And we find that if you dig more than, say, 10 or 15 feet underground, you're going to hit water, and this water isn't necessarily drinkable, and it prevents us from having any kind of basements here. So taking advantage of the high ground, Danjou could have something similar to a basement. Now, if you're interested in the former Danjou grocery, lovely home that's available to be purchased today, all you have to do is talk to my friend Debbie Fisher, and Debbie Fisher will get that contract for you. On the market today for $3.8 million. So.
Sick plug. I hope you're watching, Debbie.
Right.
You better be watching.
Some good stuff we got going on there.
Saul, who has seen a bunch of our tours, writes high level this tour.
Whoa, I'm in.
Smiley face with sunglasses, heart. Thanks, guys.
I'm in the stratosphere.
It's a big compliment coming from someone that's seen more than one of these. So.
Muchas gracias.
It's awesome.
It looks like we had to the left a tree tree branch that hit the ground. I think a big truck came through and decided to do a little bit of arbor work. I wanted to spend a minute here talking about this lovely little house, number 74. The house at number 74 really doesn't have a whole lot of historical provenance, but what it does is it represents and it reflects probably the most common style of a home that you're going to find here in the city. We call this a Charleston single house, and it gets its name a single house because it's a single room wide, and it's just one room wide in order to maximize the airflow through the house. I probably don't have to tell everyone sitting at home that Charleston in the summer gets really hot, and you want as many unrestricted breezes flowing through the house as you can possibly get. So being one room wide, you don't have any kind of walls or rooms that are going to trap and impede that air to flow through. So it keeps the house nice and cool. The house, if you notice, is oriented towards the south, and it's oriented towards the south to take advantage of our prevailing wind that we see during the summer, south and southwest winds. Charleston single house, doesn't matter whether it's 1,800 square feet, doesn't matter whether it's colonial style of architecture as is this one, or maybe Renaissance revival, it's all the same. They all have the same layout and design. And what we find is a central entryway that separates two rooms on the first floor. The front room typically is going to be a parlor or a sitting room. The back room is going to be a dining room. That central entryway leads to a central staircase that goes up to the upper floors where you'll find the bedrooms aloft. These beautiful porches that are located on the south side of the house to capture those breezes aren't called a porch here in the city. We here in Charleston call these a piazza. And a piazza, it gets its name from a little place or a town square that every little town and village in Italy will have. It's a place where folks will gather and socialize at the end of the day. You know, maybe have a cappuccino, a glass of wine, and kind of talk about it. Well, that's exactly how the piazzas were used here. It was a place to socialize with your friends and neighbor and catch up on the news of the day. Why not? Sounds like a good activity to me. Now, the other defining element of a single house is going to be a door that's located on the sidewalk side. And this door that's located on the sidewalk side has no bearing to get into the house. It simply gets you onto the property. And we call this door a privacy door. And yesterday, if the privacy door was open, well, it was an open invitation to come on in and party on down with the owners. And if the privacy door was closed, well, buzz off. We're not accepting guests today. So we commonly see the privacy door, we commonly see the piazza, all in conjunction with these beautiful Charleston single houses. 750 of these Charleston single houses are on display here in the Holy City. Now, there is a myth-busting type of element that I can get into right now, and that is some people will try to tell you that all of these houses are narrow and skinny simply because of the way we taxed them yesterday. Previously, we taxed our houses the same way we tax them today. These houses, long and skinny, just to take advantage of these, the air flow through the house. If this was the situation, we wouldn't see any kind of houses like the Danjou grocery located on the corner. We wouldn't see the second most common style of home that we find here in the city, a house called a double house. Hey, we got a single wide, we got a double wide. We're in South Carolina. Nobody leaves the lot without financing. I wanted to point out across the street and behind you, Chris, is a single house. And the single house across the street is known as the Robert Bruton House, and the Robert Bruton House is from the year 1720. So happy 300th birthday, Robert Bruton House. When they say they don't build them like they used to, I think this is what they're referring to. Now, the Robert Bruton House is indeed a single house. It simply lacks that traditional piazza, and it lacks that privacy door that we've come accustomed to seeing with these Charleston single houses. We'll notice that where that beautiful flowering cherry tree is at the back of the property, that's where the piazza is located. Just didn't make any sense with the proximity of its neighbor to have didn't make sense to have the piazza located on the south side because of the proximity of their neighbor. Where I'm standing, there would have been, and according to sketches that we see from Church Street prior to World War II, the late 1930s, there was a big iron gate that was located here, and where we see this coarsework of bricks in this herringbone pattern. This is where the privacy door would have been located. So I actually can see the remnants of an old hinge on the neighbor, and this is where that iron gate would have been. So things change, things take place. Change does take place over time.
Hey, Jim, can we just do a quick shout out to Shannon? Shannon McIver's been a faithful follower, and she's taking a quick lunch break.
Shannon's a driver, isn't she?
Oh, you remember.
Well, good. I'm glad you're at a...
I'm not the only person that knows Shannon.
Shannon's up in Canada, right?
Exactly.
You're not in
Staying
Scotland.
Hi from Ontario. Hopefully
Beautiful.
not behind the wheel.
That's
right.
right.
Now.
Stay safe. Beautiful. Well, thanks for joining, Shannon.
Thank you, Shannon.
Love it. This is really fun. We're going to take a trip down a cool little pathway known as Longitude Lane. Longitude Lane, what a neat spot. When I was a cadet at the Citadel and they sprung us loose on the first weekend to be free, I found Longitude Lane, and I just found this to be a fascinating place. Longitude Lane originally had a cannon sticking out of the ground, and the cannon gave way to this bollard. I kind of like the character of seeing a cannon here. So the cannon was taken away, gobbled up by the Charleston Museum, and the neighbors here in the neighborhood, well, they had some nostalgia. They missed their cannon. They wanted the cannon back, and so they went to a local foundry. They had a piece of iron fabricated up to look just like a cannon, and they placed it here. And unfortunately, somebody came along and they stole it. Can you imagine? So they stole the cannon. They had this really great idea, or at least an idea that I thought was great. They went to the city and they asked the city to go in halvesies on acquiring a new cannon and placing it here, and the city politely declined and gave them the concrete bollard instead. But, I kind of like the cannon, to be honest with you. Pretty cool thing. Longitude Lane here. It has these slate pavers to accommodate wagon traffic, and it also has these English river rocks in between. And these English river rocks, well, a lot of people call them cobblestones, but I like a more preferred term that's a little more accurate. I call these ballast stones, and these are actual ship's ballast brought over on empty sailing ships crossing the Atlantic to maintain stability in their holds. Even today, a modern recreational sailboat has about 10,000 pounds of either concrete or lead or iron in its keel to maintain that sailing capability. And yesterday, we started using these rocks. Captain Bill, speaking. How are you?
20,000 pounds.
Why not? The more the merrier. What you got cooking there, Captain Bill?
It's chuck ribs.
Chuck ribs. Well, I'm hungry. Every time we come down Longitude Lane, we have the ability to...
It's only 2 hours more.
We'll be done right at about 6 o'clock. That sounds good to me.
Suzanne writes, Suzanne
McMurtry, yeah.
says, love Longitude Lane.
Well, Longitude.
Thank you very much.
My friend Chris, he's actually broadcasting worldwide. We're here
Really?
we're on YouTube doing this incredible...
Well, I just covered them up with tin foil and put them in a thing. Otherwise, I would have given the world
Would
a
you
treat.
would you press the button and activate the smell-o-vision? Because the smell is just absolutely amazing. I'm picking up some hickory. I'm picking up a little bit of maple. Gosh, I don't know
Hope
what.
you guys enjoyed the tour. Unfortunately, Jim and I have to call it a day now.
We got the knife and fork and the bib ready to go. And who's your puppy?
This is Daisy.
Oh, hi, Daisy. How are you, sweetie?
Daisy's old.
Aw,
She can
aren't we
hardly
all?
see,
You're
but she's the
sweetheart,
sweetest
though.
thing ever.
Sweetest little girl.
Hey, Daisy.
is.
Is she a doodle?
Yep. She's a golden doodle.
No, golden doodle. Beautiful.
you're
We love our
sweetheart.
doggy
She
friends.
is a sweetheart.
Aww,
She's a sweetheart.
what a cutie.
She's an old sweetheart.
Well, thank you for letting us interrupt you, sir.
Oh, it was fun.
Well, thank you for being part of the
I
tour.
wish you had been a minute earlier, and I just covered them up.
We're going to be 10 minutes
Should
later,
I-
so
hey, I'll
you
tell
should
what
probably
I'll
put
do.
some more on.
I'll
I'm just
tell you
kidding.
what I'll do. I'll uncover.
Oh,
Just
this
for-
is fun. The reveal.
I mean, hey, it's live. Anything can happen when it's live.
We're operating without a net here.
Of course, you have to know that these were smoked in hickory,
That's what I'm sensing.
and then I take them off. Of course, they're seared, smoked in hickory, and then now I'm going to tenderize them.
That is amazing.
And then my wife will be very happy.
Well, if your lady's happy, everybody's happy.
I'm telling you, that's half.
And if you guys don't finish it, I guess Daisy's happy.
Yeah, she has been known to get a bite.
Atta girl. Daisy's got the
I
big,
see her licking her lips like I'm licking mine.
beautiful
I'll tell you
stuff.
what, I did this last month or so. And they were the best I ever did. So my wife said, well, they're going to be the same, aren't they? And I said, probably not.
You always got to mix it up a little bit, add a little
You
bit of
gotta
different
have the
flavor,
bad
a little bit
with
of
the
sauce,
But
Never know what's going to come out of
now,
that
see, when I'm done,
big Weber.
I will put marmalade sauce and a little vinegar and coat them at the end.
Fantastic.
And they will be kind of like a Korean type of falling off the bone type of thing.
Beautiful.
Awesome.
I love it.
Awesome.
Well, Captain, good to see you.
right.
Happy Sunday.
Thanks,
Proceed.
All right.
Okay, we'll talk to you later.
Is that one of those examples of the heart-shaped dates?
Yeah, so this, I don't,
That's a really old gate.
I'm not sure, I don't think it's a Phillips Simmons.
I don't know, but see, this is original.
You can,
This is the real deal.
you can see the way
This is 1780 or
you
something.
can find that the ends, the way they're crimped, shows that it's not manufactured, that's handmade.
Yeah, that's all.
Wow, that's so cool.
That's and see, this is the sword. See here? So maybe it was the sword gate guy.
Maybe. That was a German by the name of Christopher Werner,
Okay,
who was
there's your
responsible
sword.
for
It's
those.
got the sword on it.
Fantastic.
Very cool.
There's another one at the bottom, too.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, I love that crimping. Jim,
It's
what?
that gate's probably worth more than the house.
Ah,
Nobody knows it.
Well, Charleston has always had this, Charleston's always had
your
this
gate's
love
gonna be
affair.
gone tomorrow. you're on the internet.
Just like the cannon getting stolen.
Yeah.
We just have a absolute love affair with our ironwork here in the city, and you find this ornamental wrought iron all throughout town, and it's something that we loved prior to the Revolutionary War in the antebellum period. During the Civil War, we lost a lot of it. The South didn't have an adequate supply of iron ore. Of course, there was a naval blockade in place, and so that prevented any imports of munitions, and so we found the Confederacy recycling, and so they melted down.
I'm sure it says it's 1780,
Wow, that's amazing.
this house. So it's old. But the neat thing was, she was going to paint the dining room yellow. She was going to new paint job. But before she did that, she had to fix some damage to the wall, which could have happened 100 years ago. One of the windows upstairs opened in a thunderstorm or something, So when they're fixing it, they get into this paint, the original paint,
Wow.
the original paint job. And so Sharon says, well, what do you think? I says, I think it'd be cool to get the original paint. So she had, that of course doesn't exist, you just have to go match it. So she matched it. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Wow.
And you go, who would believe they had this paint at that time?
Isn't that fantastic? Only the wealthy really were able to paint their homes. It was just one of those things that was just outside of the realm
Well, it had to
of
be
the common.
plastered and it was painted.
If you are interested, maybe talk to the folks at the Historic Charleston Foundation. They know
get 'em
all
through here.
about that
They
stuff.
come
Yeah.
through.
Good.
They come
A
through.
good relationship to have.
Sharon's the one who researched the cannon.
Nice.
Yeah, she did that.
That's fantastic.
Ed writes, "Be careful, someone might come in the dark of the night and steal your gate."
No, we don't
I
want
said.
that.
Nobody's that stupid to do that.
Not in South Carolina.
Let's
It's a
keep
dangerous place to.
I mean, what good
Not
is it to
right.
anybody but me? It's just perfect.
That's just good to think of the kindness of strangers.
Have a wonderful day.
Hey, you too. Where are you from?
Originally the south of England, near about 45 minutes south of London, and then grew up in Connecticut. So nutmegger by growing up, but
Sounds
Brit
cool.
by birth. So.
Yeah.
Here.
I'm glad that things are getting back to normal. And
Have you gotten their vaccine?
the last one was a month ago.
Good.
I'm all done.
Awesome.
That's fantastic.
Congratulations. Great news.
I'm on the list, so hopefully we'll get
Yeah.
my jab here pretty soon.
Yeah, so it's all good. Whatever. I'd like to see everything back to normal.
I think we all would.
It's just so nice.
Beautiful.
Okay, enjoy.
Take care.
The audience awaits. Take care.
Uh-oh, we've got Evans here. Evans, how are you, buddy?
Good. I know that Weber's going already.
It's, boy, I'm telling you what, some of those ribs are just amazing.
Don't you dare eat them before we
Oh.
get back.
Hope everybody brought their appetite. Captain Bill's ready to go. Y'all have a great afternoon. Oh, I love Captain
Can
Bill.
I ask a quick question to the audience?
Oh, absolutely.
I had a feedback that for some people the audio might not be synced entirely with the video. If you're watching right now and you're having a delay between audio and video, then just give me a thumbs up, to signify, yeah, I'm having that delay. If it's all synced up for you and looking great, you just say it looks great, or a heart. Just put something in there in the comment, just so we know. We're still, science isn't an exact science, so we're still fiddling around with some aspects of this live streaming. So the feedback on the technical will be really useful. Thank you very much, guys, if you participate. Thank you. Please.
No problem. No, everything's good. Just a nice little trip down Longitude Lane here. We've got, if you notice, it's hard to see, I'm sure, with the camera and the angles and things like that. Usually if there's a bit of moisture, maybe it's just rain or some morning dew, we find that there are actual indentations, grooves, ruts in these slate pavers from all of the wagon traffic that's taken place over the course of time. And it's just amazing to think about all that traffic that would have been coming up and down Longitude Lane. Notice on the walls here, we have this green growth. The green growth on the walls is known as creeping fig, and the creeping fig is preferred over ivy here. We don't like ivy. Ivy digs into the bricks and the mortar, causes loss of compromise in the long run, and so we don't like it. And so we use this creeping fig. And if you don't like the creeping fig, you can scrape it off with a paint scraper and get your wall back painted up and make it look just nice again. If you let it go crazy and out of control, if you just don't attend to it or have your landscapers trim it up, it actually will bear little fruits. It'll bear these little figs, which is kind of funny to see growing off the side of your wall. Can't eat them, unfortunately. The creeping fig, the figs that it bears, are kind of bitter. And they really aren't that great to eat. Squirrels and birds, they like to eat them. I'll take a right here and continue on to East Bay Street. We've got this time of year some beautiful trees that are flowering and showing their stuff. This type of a tree in particular is in bloom, and it was blooming ever since late December, January, February. Here we're into March and it's still doing its thing. This type of a flowering tree is called a Camellia japonica, and as the name implies, Camellia japonica, it's from Japan. And so if you take a look at Charleston's location on the globe, spin the globe around following our latitude line, we share the same latitude as Shanghai in eastern China. We enjoy what's known as a subtropical climate. This means basically that it doesn't really freeze all that much, and we see the same type of plant materials that grow well in Asia growing well here. These beautiful camellias in China are known as tea trees, and they actually take some of the leaves from these trees, use them to make tea, actually take some of the oil from the leaves and make oil for cooking and for consumption. But the beautiful thing about these camellias is that when they drop their flowers, they don't just drop individual petals, they drop the flower entirely. And so we can see around the bed of the tree, we can see this bed of flowers. So at the base of the tree, we see this bed of flowers, and it's just absolutely remarkable to see. I think there's something like 5,000 examples of camellias that we'll see here in being cultivated. Not quite showing itself, still a little bit of a delay going on. This is wisteria that's taken over, the vine that's taken over the fence, and wait about a month, get into April, it's going to be alive and full of these beautiful purple flowers and just is absolutely amazing. You'll find that it actually attracts folks taking selfies at Rainbow Row down to here. So it's actually one of these places that gets a little more attention than what we find over there on Rainbow Row. I'm going to continue walking down East Bay Street here. Something that we see pretty frequently on our sidewalks are these big impressive pieces of stone. And these big impressive pieces of stone, well, they're known to dent your car door if you fly it open and you're not aware that it's here. And this big impressive piece of stone is known as a carriage stone. And the carriage stone put into place to help a lady get aboard our principal means of transportation, a horse and a carriage. Of course, we didn't have things like Mustangs rolling around. We had other types of horses. We had draft horses, and we had mules. No minis, no Mercedes. So we had these horses and carriages, and to help a lady get aboard, we would have these carriage stones in place. There was this enterprising College of Charleston student, went through town with a GPS, I don't know, about 6-7 years ago, and he counted up all of the carriage stones he could see in the public right-of-way, and he came up with the number 110. 110 of these tripping stones are laying around the city sidewalks, and if you aren't careful, maybe you're out at happy hour and consume one too many glasses of wine, maybe have one too many margaritas. Well, these carriage stones become tripping stones really quickly, so you just got to be careful of where you're walking. They'll wipe you out without you paying attention. Now, going into combination with those carriage stones is another device that we frequently see adjacent to the entryway of some of the homes here. We see this boot scraper in place, and this boot scraper in place to clean your shoes off before you enter into the house. If you think about it, the Mercedes, the Mustang, the Minis, yeah, they create emissions, but the emissions from the horses and mules, they weren't gaseous. They were more physical in nature. And so to get that physical emission off of your feet, scrape your feet off using the boot scraper to get into the house. And I'm waiting for that College of Charleston student to come along and count up all these boot scrapers, probably about the same number as these carriage stones.
It's fascinating. I learned a few years ago that when I was trying to get a style dress for like a dress-up party that was supposed to be from, you know, like the end of the 1800s, that the guy selling me the pants said that traditionally men would wear pants that are trousers that would be shorter, much shorter than today, so that they didn't drag their trousers in the horse muck.
Makes a lot of sense to me.
And actually socks weren't popular. Your shoes would get dirty, and then you take them off, and like you wouldn't get your trousers, dirty. You didn't need the socks. You just have a space where your leg was exposed. I don't know if that's true or apocryphal, but I bought the pair of trousers that were too short for me in the end.
Well, I would have to say that maybe I would have been right in fashion when I was in high school, when I was, growing out my clothes, and I had the flood waters where people would tease me and say, hey, why don't your shoes have a party and invite your pants down? Bad joke. Let's go across the street over here.
I didn't mean not to laugh. It was funny.
Crossing over East Bay Street, getting into the sunshine a little bit here. We've got the site of the Carolina Yacht Club here, located at East Bay Street and kind of the intersection of Stoll's Alley. Carolina Yacht Club, second oldest continually operating yacht club in America. The oldest yacht club is that of the New York Yacht Club. 1883 was the foundation of the Carolina Yacht Club. Now originally, just prior to it becoming the yacht club, well, it was the headquarters locally of the Confederate Navy. Prior to that, it was a location known as the Cotton Dock, and this is where loose cotton we bundled up, taken up overseas and put onto ships. The original structure on the left-hand side of the property is that brick structure that has 6 individual bay fronts, and each one of those bay fronts would have represented a separate office for a cotton broker, and today performs an invaluable service to the yacht club. It's the bar to the yacht club. Of course, no yacht club would be successful without the bar, so it's a very popular place to be.
Not a lot of sober sailors.
Located where we would have found the 4 corners of the old wall, we have a bronze marker in place. And so it's almost like a little bit of a scavenger hunt that you can entertain yourselves with when you visit Charleston by finding these 4 bronze markers. Presently, we happen to be standing at the southeastern corner of the wall, a location known as the Granville Bastion, where we and kind of informally began the tour was right at the midway mark here at that Half Moon Battery, the site of where the captain of the guard and the barracks was located. And again, 62 acres of high ground. This little trapezoidal shape was our original colony. Just about an hour ago, high tide crested, and you might be able to, with a wide angle here, take a view of the street surface, maybe see the water surface, and you'll find that this water level is actually presently still a little bit higher over the street. This whole area, once we get south of that corner, this all man-made land. In order to build these big, beautiful mansions that are located on the right side of the seawall, we had to have this seawall constructed. Construction began in the 1830s. 1835 it was completed, and we found in order to build these big, beautiful mansions on the right-hand side along East Battery, we find that we had to keep the water on one side and the land on the other. As a result, the birthday of these houses that we see along East Battery, 1835, 1840 and onwards. So most of these houses, 8 of them that lie on East Battery, are the originals. Let's take a look into the harbor here for a moment. I want you to take a look at some of the water, and we can see the profile of the beach. You know, Charleston is surrounded by water. This is the only beach that we have here in the city. So this is the only beach, Charleston's beach. Back in the 80s, when windsurfing was popular, you saw guys tossing their boards and their sails over, jumping into the water and sailing away and having some fun. The profile of our beaches here out on the barrier islands, back in the salt marsh and the estuary, it's just like this. It's a very gradual entry into the water, not a whole lot of rocks and things like that going on. So it's all rather sloping, rather gentle entryway. And this, it gives rise to our local dolphin population to entertain and engage in a unique feeding process. Here in coastal South Carolina and in coastal Georgia, the dolphins engage in what's known as strand feeding. They'll actually use their echolocation to round up schools of bait fish. They'll work as teams and they'll drive that bait fish onto the shore, and then the dolphins will beach themselves and they'll have this beautiful seafood buffet. It's absolutely amazing to see these 6-foot, 8-foot dolphins propelling themselves out of the water, pushing all that bait ashore, and then having this veritable feast. It is absolutely remarkable. If you ever have a chance to visit the Low Country, get yourselves onto a tour boat. Get out there on a dolphin watching cruise, and it's absolutely beautiful sight. When I'm not doing walking tours here, I'm a licensed captain and going to be joining this spring and this summer tide line tours out of Folly Beach. So come on down, take a tour with me on tide line tours. A beautiful way to get back into the salt marsh environment. If you take a look at the street sign on the right there, it's East Bay and Water. Pretty soon we're going to converge onto East Battery. Water Street, again, that was the location of where we would have found the southern wall of the walled city, formerly known as Vanderhorst Creek, filled in pretty much right at sea level where it is today. A lot of these houses that are located right on East Battery, East Bay, they don't have names, you know, kind of like you'd name a pet. A lot of these names are of the original owners and builders. The house on the right that is has an interesting architectural design is known as the Porchet Simmons house from 1842. The Porchet Simmons house isn't really referred to as the Porchet Simmons house. We call it the Compromise house. And if you take a look at it closely, you can probably figure out pretty quickly as to why we call it the Compromise house. The Porchets were entertaining the idea of building their home. Mr. and Mrs. Porchet couldn't agree on what kind of architectural style to present. He liked a more classic revival style of architecture that we'll see on the right-hand side, and then she liked a more Victorian style of architecture that's appearing on the left. And so the compromise was made so they could have both. And truly, the way a long-lasting relationship truly works is by practicing the art of compromise on a regular basis. A couple of years ago, I had my house renovated, and I was practicing compromise on a daily basis, just usually by saying, yes, dear.
Just to be careful, because she's watching.
Oh, I know. I'm telling you what, it's you'll never win the battle. As we continue, I want you to focus in on the house on the right-hand side here, the second inn that has that beautiful cast iron work on its balcony. Beautiful piazza located on the south side, the American flag located on the second story piazza. This house is known as the Edmondston Alston House, and the Edmondston Alston House would have found itself playing a key role in the very beginning of the war between the states. Standing where that American flag is presently, we would have found General Pierre Gustave Toutant Beauregard, the commander of the Confederate forces here locally, at 4:30 in the morning of April the 12th of 1861. He stood there with a cigar in one hand and a skyrocket in the other. And at 4:30 in the morning, launched a skyrocket high into the sky and arced over Charleston Harbor. And this was the indication for the Confederate troops stationed over at Fort Johnson, that low-lying structure that we see on the other side of the harbor, that battery of mortars maintained at Fort Johnson, to fire a mortar round high into the sky that arced over the island fort sitting right in the middle of Charleston Harbor. Fort Sumter, an island fort whose construction began in 1835, not quite complete by 1861, was supposed to have a complement of 600 soldiers, was supposed to have 135 guns in place. As I said, it wasn't quite complete on that fateful day of April the 12th of 1861, when that mortar round flew into the sky, arced high over the fort at about 500 feet, exploded in a brilliant red star, and that was the indication for the other Confederate batteries located on Morris Island, on Sullivan's Island, in Mount Pleasant, to unload onto the fort. The battle lasted for approximately 34 hours, and poor Major Anderson was out there with about 84 men, really didn't have the temerity to fight back, really didn't have the ability to engage into the fight. You see, he found himself out there on Fort Sumter the day after Christmas, December the 26th of 1860, and he found himself out there without supply. We found that a series of events caused him to be out there onto the fort. On December the 20th of 1860, 165 men met here in Charleston and they, at Institute Hall, unanimously voted to break away from the Union, to secede from the Union. They all signed the Articles of Secession, and this is what began. This was the first domino to fall in the beginning of the Civil War. Major Anderson knew that it wasn't safe for his dependents, the soldiers' wives and children, to be here, ordered them away after secession took place. He, on the cover of darkness, day after Christmas, migrated from Fort Moultrie, that was located at the eastern end of Sullivan's Island, onto that island fort. And from there began a game of waiting. He essentially found himself in the middle of a chess game where the President of the United States was arguing with the governor of the state of South Carolina, who was going to depart the fort, how this was going to take place. And of course, the Union forces were rather stubborn. We found that on January the 9th, of 1861, a Union steamer named the Star of the West was attempting to resupply Fort Sumter with the guns and butter, resupply Fort Sumter with about 300 soldiers, and it was repulsed by cadets from the Citadel who fired upon the Star of the West. It turned and was never able to be successfully resupplied. So, traditionally spoken as the first shots of the Civil War. We found without resupply, things getting a little desperate for Major Anderson, there was a flotilla of 6 vessels that were supposed to come from New York that were going to resupply. Spies in New York, Confederate spies, alerted the Confederacy, and so unfortunately they were unable to actually come into, and on April the 14th all hell broke loose. And as I said, this battle really didn't last all that long in the grand scheme of things, 34 hours, and after 34 hours the flag was lowered, and Major Anderson did not quite surrender the fort, but he simply evacuated the fort. Interesting relationship. Major Anderson and his adversary on the Confederacy, General Beauregard, they were friends. Anderson, he was a professor of military science at West Point. Beauregard, his student. And so really these guys weren't really thinking about shooting each other. They fought together in the Mexican War, and truly they didn't want it to come to blows. Well, he was allowed to step off, and he was allowed to evacuate. Major Anderson returned. Major Anderson returned to this island fort on April the 14th of 1865. The day that he lowered that flag, he was in place to re-raise the flag in a ceremony at the end of the Civil War. We found that the Confederate forces evacuated Fort Sumter on February the 17th of 1865, and then in April we found the ceremony taking place. There's something interesting. President Lincoln was invited to Charleston to participate in this flag raising ceremony. President Lincoln was invited to participate in this ceremony, but he was advised that it was just simply too unsafe for him here in Charleston, that there was too much animosity present and his safety couldn't be guaranteed. And so Lincoln stayed home, and on that fateful day, that same day that the flag was raised, we found him meeting his assassin, John Wilkes Booth, at Ford's Theater. So I maintain that had President Lincoln arrived on a federal steamer surrounded by federal forces, where would he have been safer? He would have been safer out there on that island fort instead of out there on Ford's Theater.
What an amazing example of how small decisions can have such huge impacts throughout history.
Absolutely. Another fun piece of trivia is that Major Anderson, he had a great grandson who went on to star in From Here to Eternity. Montgomery Clift was his great grandson, which I think is kind of an interesting piece of trivia. And he also had a brother, and his brother, his name was William Marshall Anderson. And William Marshall Anderson decided at the end of the Civil War that he didn't like the way things were going, so he went to Mexico to establish a Confederate colony there. And curiously enough, some Confederates at the end of the Civil War decided things weren't really going the way they liked to see it. They took off from places like Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and went down to Brazil, established a colony there that was called Americana. And Americana took advantage of the institution of slavery that wasn't banned in Brazil until 1888.
Just a couple of questions that have come in, but I didn't want to interrupt because that story was so compelling and engaging. Ken LeClaire asks, have the homes along the street that we're walking on, have they, is this an area that gets damaged by badly by hurricanes? And the second question you have coming from Jill Smith-Bellis is to ask if you could explain why so many Charleston homes have the sky blue painted on the ceilings of their porches.
Absolutely, yeah, 2 great questions. Typically, Ken, just to answer your question about hurricanes and damage that we see from water, if you ever see Jim Cantori here along the seawall here on the Battery, it's a really good idea to get your evacuation plans together. We see Jim Cantori standing here whenever there's a tropical storm or a hurricane, the waves come crashing over. We'll find standing water here on East Battery, East Bay, and find that there is a lot of damage. A lot of these houses are built up off the ground. We find that they have the first floor really isn't a living space. It's kind of like a sub-basement. And yeah, you do see intrusion. Sandbagging, something that takes place on a regular basis. And yeah, it's just kind of a fact of life. We saw a couple of years ago some collaboration between the city of Charleston and Dutch engineers. Called this the Dutch Dialogue. And they came along and helped us out mapping, give us a bit of a roadmap to help us out in planning what to do to mitigate this flooding and keeping the water on one side and the land on the other. The other question, great question about this color that's painted on the ceilings of our piazzas. That color is what we traditionally call haint blue. Haint, a term that comes to us from the enslaved Africans. The enslaved Africans had this superstition that evil spirits wouldn't cross a body of water. And so we found window frames, doors themselves, ceilings of the piazzas painted that light color blue. It would keep those evil spirits from entering into the home. Has a practical application. You know, if you have your ceiling of your piazza painted flat white or gloss white, you're going to find that it's going to show off some dirt. You're going to find that it's going to reflect some glare. And so most of those things are really unacceptable. And so that light color blue hides the dirt, and it also keeps the glare from blinding you. Some people say that it also helps to keep things like birds from building nests on your piazza, keeps spiders from spinning webs. So I'm not sure if that's true or not, but if you go to a Sherwin-Williams and you say, hey, I need a can of haint blue, they will accommodate you, at least here. But if you're in another part of the country, just tell them you want some porch ceiling blue. That's what they call it there. Here in White Point Gardens, created on fill. This is all marshland, and it was all man-made land. Came along around that 1835 type of time frame. We've got these beautiful oak trees that adorn the park. These are known as live oaks, and the live oaks get their name because they're essentially live all year long. They never lose their green color. These trees were preferred trees to construct ships from. If you take a look at the way the arms of the live oaks naturally bend, translates really nicely to the ribs of a ship. And we'll find that the wood itself is rather strong and is rather durable, so good construction material.
More so than regular oaks, I've read. That
Good
live
stuff.
oaks are even, the wood is even harder.
Dense.
Dense, I mean. Yeah, thank you.
We find that, like in a lot of cities that have parks, monuments are adorning those parks. And here in Charleston, we have kind of a unique monument that we see on display. And this is a monument that's established to pirates and piracy. Back in 1718, probably the most famous of all pirates, Blackbeard, he and a group of 4 other pirates decided that they were going to blockade Charleston Harbor. And they were blockading Charleston Harbor, raiding ships that were entering, raiding ships that were exiting. And they didn't want to really just plunder the city for gold and riches. They actually needed some medicine. Some of the pirates had developed syphilis, and in order to get cured, they needed this chest of medicine. They took hostage a couple of our assemblymen, members of our government, and they held them hostage, not for any kind of gold or silver, but for this chest of medicine. And once that chest of medicine was delivered, hostages kicked overboard and they sailed away. Charleston had a rather interesting symbiotic relationship with these pirates. You think about it, you're a merchant, you own a store, you got these pirates coming into town, they've got these cut rate goods for sale. You essentially become a fencing operation. The pirates are coming to town, they're spending a lot of money on drinks and women, and the cash was flowing. And so, these pirates are somewhat tolerated. Well, they kind of wore out their welcome when Blackbeard decided to blockade the harbor and found himself really losing that welcome mat. One of the pirates who associated himself with Blackbeard was a gentleman by the name of Stede Bonnet. Stede Bonnet, referred to as the gentleman pirate. He was actually a retired British major in the British Army. In his retirement, went to Barbados and established a sugarcane plantation there. Decided that he was bored of being a sugarcane planter, took to the seas as a pirate, and he was a rather unconventional pirate. Rather than seizing a ship and capturing that ship, he went out and he bought one. Rather than impressing a crew from another pirate ship, went on Craigslist and put out an ad. Took to the seas, really didn't know what he was doing, and he hooked up with Blackbeard and kind of like a student-teacher relationship. And unfortunately, he's the guy that got caught by Colonel William Rhett, the famous pirate hunter. There's another pirate who's mentioned here, a guy by the name of Richard Worley. He's a lesser-known pirate, but Richard Worley is more known as a graphic designer than as a pirate. Richard Worley's the guy that came up with that iconic skull and crossbones design. So we know Richard Worley basically from his flag and not from his acts of piracy. So he should have stuck to graphic design. Otherwise, got strung up here, hanged by the neck at this location here at White Point Gardens. And I've just got a word to the wise. Anybody sitting at home happens to be on a committee that's going to commission a big, beautiful monument that's going to go into their park, or maybe just any kind of somebody at home who's doing some publishing, always get a proofreader. Make sure you always get a proofreader because we don't find the pirates meeting their just desserts. They're just deserts. So I'm not really sure if this is the Gobi Desert, the Sahara Desert. Which desert are we talking about here? But it's really, get a proofreader, would you?
It's going to be in stone, you know?
In perpetuity. So that's the way that goes. But yeah, so here we are in beautiful White Point Gardens. On the right, we have a mansion that's known as the Villa Margarita. And the Villa Margarita was originally a wedding gift for a young lady whose name was Daisy. And if you translate Daisy to Italian, comes out as Margarita, and we call it the Villa Margarita. A Villa Margarita constructed out of concrete. The only house in the city that at the time was constructed out of concrete in 1895. Villa Margarita, also the only house in the city that has an indoor swimming pool. 18-foot by 12-foot marble swimming pool is on the Church Street side, and it served as a hotel for a period in time in the 1920s and early 1930s. Folks like Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, a couple of presidents stayed here and found itself to be a stopping ground for artists and other celebrities making their way from New York and the Northeast down to Florida. And we found Villa Margarita today is in private hands. John Polk, how are you, sir?
Fine, what's going on?
Oh, nothing much. Just doing a little live streaming of the tour. Oh, you're doing fine. Aren't you right about that? Villa Margarita, designed by a rather famous New York architect, guy with a funny name, Dinkelberg, designed this. And Dinkelberg is also famous for designing the Flatiron Building up there in Manhattan, up there in the Flatiron District. So from there to here, his work shows. We're going to continue walking on South Battery. South Battery here was Water's Edge at some point. It was known as South Bay Street, so it was actually referencing the point that it did face the bay, the waterfront property. Colonel William Washington House just across the street. Colonel William Washington, hero of the Revolutionary War, was a cousin to President George Washington.
When we were in Beaufort recently with Bill Reynolds,
What a great tour that was.
That was fantastic. But one of the William Rhett House was where we started actually the tour, and I guess that that Rhett had something to do with I can't remember exactly what Bill said, but I think that because Blackbeard was not too far from Beaufort actually, where he kind of posted up for a little while.
Well, do you know the ability here mentioned that you know how those dolphins like to propel themselves onto shore? Well, this was a popular spot for pirates to stop to careen their ships because we don't have any rocks here, because it's a very nice, gentle, sloping approach into the water. Super low tides with new moons and full moons, you could bring your ship close to shore, lay it onto the beach as the tide dropped out, and you could actually scrape the barnacles off of the ship. You could recalk the ship, and you could do some maintenance and care.
Reminds me of that movie Master and Commander.
Yeah, so it was a common practice. Now you, while visiting the city, are staying, okay. We've got ourselves here on Meeting Street. Meeting Street is probably one of these big, beautiful promenades, one of these big streets that folks just absolutely find charming. Got to be careful when you're walking on Meeting Street. These trees will kick up and knock your sidewalk out of the way. Josiah Smith House, that's located across the street here, has one of those examples you saw in Beaufort of what we call one of these examples of these staircases that are in place for symmetry. We find that these opened armed staircases have an entryway on the left-hand side and the right-hand side. Myth busting. A lot of people will try to tell you that a gentleman would enter on one side, a lady on the other. They would meet at the door to enter into the home. Well, you know, think about this. A proper gentleman isn't going to leave the side of a lady to do something as dangerous as ascending or descending a flight of stairs. And so they were simply put into place for symmetry. This is a beautiful Georgian example of a home, and everything is symmetrical. The left-hand side, the right-hand side, all very well balanced. And so we find ourselves having this in place for that purpose. A lot of times we would have found on our piazzas these louvered panels in place. Louvered panels in place to provide some privacy for the folks enjoying some of those nice cool breezes. You know, if you think about it, proper gentleman wouldn't be seen out in public without his tie and jacket. Lady, wearing all these layers of clothes, could take a couple of layers of clothes off and enjoy those breezes, cool off, and they would not be seen, not be compromised by the passers-by. Oh. So we're just approaching probably one of the more stately mansions here in the city, formerly known as the Calhoun Mansion, changed its name to the Williams Mansion, and frankly, I think this was an appropriate move. George Walton Williams, in 1876, he was the person who actually built the Williams Mansion, and why I think he should get credit for actually having his nameplate on this masterpiece. Now, George Walton Williams in 1876 constructed the Williams Mansion in this Italianate style of architecture, and we found that George Walton Williams, at the end of the Civil War, emerged as one of the most wealthiest men around. George Walton Williams, during the war, entertained himself as a blockade runner. And just as a quick refresher, one of the first strategic plans put into play by the Union forces during the Civil War was a strategy that was known as the Anaconda Plan. And like that constricting snake, the Anaconda Plan was going to constrict and restrict the Confederacy by placing fleets of armed warships at the mouth of each harbor. This would keep any kind of imports from coming into the Confederacy, imports to help sustain the war. It would help prevent any kind of exports to leave, to help fund the war effort. And so this Anaconda Plan essentially choked off the South. Well, for every action, there's a reaction, and this gave rise to this group of entrepreneurs. These blockade runners built fast and nimble steamships in England, took them down to the Bahamas, loaded them up with guns and butter and other supplies, and at night, and without aids to navigation, they would run the gauntlet and they would pierce this federal blockade. And if they made it, well, they made a lot of money. And if they got caught, well, they lost everything. So very high risk, very high reward. And we found that folks like George Walton Williams made a boatload of money. George Walton Williams was a pretty interesting guy. He was a rather savvy businessman. Rather than getting paid in any kind of cash or currency, was paid in gold and silver. So at the end of the war, emerged as the wealthiest man in town. And as the wealthiest man in town, he built the biggest mansion in town. 32 rooms, 36 fireplaces, 28,800 square feet of heated space. So what a testimony to his wealth. The Calhoun Mansion came to be because his eldest daughter inherited the home once he passed away. She married into a popular South Carolina family, the Calhoun family, and they operated their home as a hotel. And so the Calhoun mansion was supposed to be a nameplate that would draw in guests featuring that famous name Calhoun. It's often thought that when Margaret Micheal was a child, she came with her family and were guests at the Calhoun mansion. And as a child, she was surrounded by these stories of the swashbuckling blockade running entrepreneur George Walton Williams. And it's often thought that Margaret Micheal used the legacy of George Walton Williams to build that fictional character, Rhett Butler, in her novel, Gone with the Wind. Under normal circumstances, we can tour the Calhoun mansion, the Williams mansion. We find that unfortunately, because of the pandemic, it's not available to be toured.
Teague says that is a majestic house. This 23,000 square foot one, exceptional.
Absolutely exceptional. It has a, on the third floor, it has this ballroom that has this inlaid parquet floor. Ceiling that's about 19 feet tall is domed in stained glass. Just crossing over Atlantic Street here. I want you to, I hate to do this, but we have to turn the camera around here a little bit. We have located at the intersection of sort of Atlantic Street and of Meeting Street. We've got this house here, this single house. If you notice, all the shutters are closed in the closed position. And this happened to be the second home of one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence from South Carolina, Thomas Hayward Jr. This was his second house, built in 1801 as a federal style of architecture. I don't really recognize it as being the second home of Thomas Hayward Jr. I recognize this as being the Vampire House. The Vampire House, check it out. All of those shutters are in the closed position, and they're always in the closed position. The home is owner occupied, and you'll see the Amazon delivery truck come by, you'll see the Federal Express truck come by. They deposit those packages on the doorstep, but nobody comes out of the house to retrieve those packages until the sun goes down. So you can only make the logical conclusion that the owners must be vampires, right? Can't think of any other reason. Well, there actually is a method to the madness, and I think we can at least explain why those shutters are in the permanently closed position. We find that each one of these rooms inside of the former signer of the Declaration of Independence home has the original hand-painted wallpaper on the walls. In the dining room, for example, there's this amazing scene of the Siege of Charleston painted in the dining room. We've got a blue room, we've got a yellow room, we've got a green room, and it's all this ornate hand-painted wallpaper. And in order to preserve the wallpaper, in order to preserve that decorative work in the face of harmful UV rays, they always keep those shutters in a permanently closed position. Now, as to why they only retrieve their packages from the front stoop during the evening hours, well, you can only draw this logical conclusion that they must be vampires.
Ken LeClaire asks, is there a reason why so many of the buildings and houses are 3 stories tall?
You know, that's a good question. I really don't have an answer for it. Probably just out of the practicality of constructing your home to have the space necessary for your family. We find that typically on the one floor will be the social floor, the floor to be entertained, a parlor, sitting room, dining room. Maybe sometimes on the second story you'll find things like the library in place and maybe a study or an office. But it's just like today, you know, it's not one size fits all. You don't find every home being 3 stories tall. But
Austin Gresham says, oh my God, love this, vampires. And Alba Leone, just she's also a regular. So Alba, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Alba.
There's so much history and beauty there. So
Well,
thank you, Alba.
I appreciate you coming aboard. Now, Austin, yeah, the vampires, pretty crazy. You know, New Orleans, you're going to be going to New Orleans, and you know, all of a sudden, who was that? The vampire Lestat, you know, is known for inhabiting that city. So maybe bring one in the trunk of your car, and who knows, one town to another. We've got this white wooden fence that we see here along this home, and this white wooden fence would have been originally an iron fence, and we call this a badge of honor. We call this a badge of honor because the owners would have been approached by Confederate soldiers. They would have been begged to donate their iron fence to the cause, to the Confederacy, to be melted down, to be recycled into things like cannons and cannonballs. They replaced those iron fences with wood fences, painted them white, called them badges of honor. Today, we just know in the back of our minds there would have been a iron fence where this wood fence stands today. These guys, I guess they weren't so generous. A couple of interesting homes are approaching us here on the left and on the right. And we talked a little bit about those Charleston single houses being a single room wide. Well, the next most popular style of home is 2 rooms wide, separated by a central entryway. Has a central staircase as well. Sometimes we call this style of architecture, the style of a home, we call it a 4/4. 4 rooms on the first floor, 4 rooms on the second floor. Right here at number 34 is a great example of one of these double houses, as we call it, double room wide. This was the home of a former governor, and it happened to be the very last official Royal Crown governor that was established here in the city.
So cool.
Just across the street, the house at number 35, it too was occupied by a former governor. This is the William Bull Mansion. And William Bull, governor of the colony, prior to us coming into protection by Mother England and becoming a Royal Crown colony. A beautiful example of a double house. Now, as we continue up Meeting Street, start to see some of these beautiful haint blue ceilings of our piazzas. Yeah. And we get to see these lovely twinkling gas lamps that are on display here. And these twinkling gas lamps were something that became popular by a popular mayor that we had here in the city. Elected into office in 1975, maintaining 10 terms as mayor, Mayor Joseph Reilly officially retired in 2016. I can do the math for you. That's 41 years of service to the city. Mayor Reilly, early on, wanted to brand Charleston. He wanted the city to look like a city from the 1700s or the 1800s. And one of the first things he did was introduce these gas lamps by offering a tax credit to the owners who installed them. Worked out a deal with our utility, so the cost of the lamp, the cost of the installation, would be amortized over time on your power bill, so the expense wasn't this nagging thing that would cause a lot of problems for the owners. You'd take it out over time on your power bill. So it made it a very attractive proposition. The other thing that Mayor Reilly did about this same time was, if you look up and down Meeting Street here, you'll notice as we've been walking that you don't see any utility poles sticking out of the sidewalks. You don't see any dangling wires going across the street. He worked out a deal with our utility to bury all of that infrastructure, and we find that without having that interruption of sight lines, it makes the city feel like a colonial city, a city from the 1700s or the 1800s. Really helps us out during hurricane and tropical storm season. We don't find these beautiful trees knocking down the power lines and causing a disruption of power. So good job, Mayor Reilly. He's got his fingerprints all over the city, and I'm telling you what, he made such a huge impact. For the past 10 years, Mayor Reilly has been seeking to establish a new museum here in town, and breaking ground last year was the International African American Museum.
If the doors open like that, does that mean that you're being invited in these days still?
I think we're going to go and party down. I bet there's a nice cold margarita waiting for us. And let's see what's going on in there. Well, I don't see anybody at home. I'm sure they're maybe just working.
The door open accidentally.
They're just working that cocktail shaker for us.
Well, we're happy to take a quick look.
Why not? But yeah, so Mayor Reilly's been working on this new museum, the International African American Museum. It should be completed by 2022, and it's going to be a great resource for the city. It's actually being built and operated in conjunction with the Smithsonian. So it's going to be one of these world-class events, locations where we can actually properly tell the story of the enslaved.
Did Mayor Reilly ever run for statewide or federal office?
Not to my knowledge. No, not to my knowledge. He just turned 79 years old. He's still kicking. What a great guy.
Yeah.
Still maintains office hours at his law firm, and just an incredible gentleman. We find that this new museum just got an interesting donation, courtesy of the Church of the Latter-day Saints. The Mormons donated a whopping $5.5 million to the museum, and this whopping $5.5 million is destined to create a center of genealogical research. Turns out the Mormons are really into genealogy, and they want to help the descendants today of former slaves help round that circle and find where they came from the continent of Africa. So kind of round that circle, and kind of find their roots and origins. I think it's going to be a really great contribution.
Shannon, thanks for stopping in. We appreciate that your lunch break is over. Always good to see you.
Bye, Miss McIver.
Can't wait to see you again soon.
Good stuff. Oh, I wanted to point out right across the street here, one of 5 museum homes that we have here in the city. This, of all the 5 museum homes, is the granddaddy of them all. This is the Nathaniel Russell House. The Nathaniel Russell House, great example of a federal style of architecture that was popular from around 1790 up until about 1820 or 1830. Constructed in 1808, Nathaniel Russell was a shipping magnate, entrepreneur's entrepreneur. Nathaniel Russell, check this out. When he built his house, the average cost of the construction of a home here in the city was $2,500. Well, Nathaniel Russell built his house for the sum of $80,000. Wow, $80,000. That's a lot of bang for the buck, and wow, it is head and shoulders. It is the granddaddy of them all. Nathaniel Russell spared no expense, and today it is a home that's open for tours. It's a museum house that's sponsored by the historic Charleston Foundation in conjunction with the Charleston Museum.
I'll put a link down in the comments after the tour for people if they want to.
Oh, that sounds like a great
find
idea.
out more information about how to visit as well.
The elements of the house on the south side here that has the rounded the bay fronts, we would have found his office, Mr. Nathaniel Russell's office on the first floor there. On the second story, that's where the dining room would have existed, and up there on the top floor, that was his bedroom. It's just absolutely amazing. So beautiful. Love those balconies. To the rear of the house would have been the dependencies, as we call them. First we would have found the kitchen house, then the servants' quarters. Typically there would have been a carriage house in place. That unfortunately was demolished, and presently they're working on renovating those spaces, those dependencies, and likely they'll be able to be toured here in the future. We do have 5 museum houses, as I mentioned, and each one of these museum houses does a really good job of showing you what a home would have looked like in a specific time in Charleston's story. So we're very happy to show them all. One of my favorite houses, other than the Nathaniel Russell House, is a house that's located kind of up north of Calhoun Street, maybe about a mile or so from where we're standing today. And it's called the Aiken-Rhett House. And the Aiken-Rhett House is kind of unique. This house here, the Nathaniel Russell House, is jam-packed with these beautiful antiques and finishes and just all the things that would have surrounded Nathaniel Russell. Well, the Aiken-Rhett House is devoid of all of that stuff. And what you see are exposed floors, exposed walls, exposed ceiling, and it all shows you the construction practices that took place in the 1790s, and it really gives you a great feeling of what these professional carpenters and tradesmen were working with. No trip to Home Depot, no trip to Lowe's to get a DeWalt power tool. It was all done by hand. Just amazing to see. Got some lovely rosemary here. I'm going to get some aromatherapy. Oh boy, that smells good. Hey, is it Thanksgiving or what?
Wow, that's lovely. It is so nice.
I like it myself.
Oh gosh, I wish you guys could smell that. It's so fresh.
I'm telling you what, we need the smell-o-vision, like I said, back there with Captain Bill and his ribs.
Well, we have unfortunately, I think the reason why we might have a slight lag between the audio and the visual is that I tried something for the first time today of adding subtitles to the video as it was going, because I knew that we were going to have a lot of non-native English speakers on our experience today.
Okay.
As we explored the best of Charleston. And I think that might have caused that. I just wanted to say and be clear about it that once I post the actual high definition version of this that we're recording at the same time as broadcasting, that'll sync up and be great again as a top video for people to watch again and send to their friends and such. Yeah, people can keep reliving this amazing experience that you're giving us today.
You know, you can actually share the link with your friends, you know, talking about taking that family vacation. Hey, let's rendezvous in Charleston. Do you want to stay in town? Do you want to stay at the beach? Hey, you know, let's spend a couple of days in town enjoying this beautiful history, a couple of days at the beach to recreate in the beautiful sun and surf. Why not have the best of both worlds?
And people can find you again by going through Walks of Charleston and the link that's posted.
Absolutely. Walks of Charleston, Low Country Walking Tours is another operation. We tend to have smaller group walking tours with Low Country Walking Tours. Limit my groups to 12, so you get a little bit more of an intimate experience. And if you want me all for yourself, you can obviously book me for a private tour. What a great way to see the city on your own agenda. You can check off those boxes and have me walk with you throughout that whole process.
I'll add a link to Low Country Walking Tours as well.
Oh, that'd be terrific.
Of course.
Taking a look down Trad Street here, yeah, we get to see that obvious, not so obvious at first glance, but that omission of those dangling power lines, these beautiful sight lines, all preserved and just able to see just how beautiful the city is.
Gig Harbor.
Ah, beautiful. Mary Faust, how are you? Good to see you, dear.
And Pat, thank you for the feedback. Pat Cassidy, thank you for the feedback on the subtitles. It was something that we tried today for the first time on a live stream, so I'm glad that if it might have been the culprit for the slight audio delay, at least it was useful for you.
Good stuff. You know, we talked a little bit about the civil engineering here in the city, with the city being 60% man-made land and not a whole lot of civil engineering going on when we're filling in these low-lying areas. Interesting tidbit is that the city didn't receive the benefit of indoor plumbing until 1895. Up until 1895, we were regularly using outhouses that we called privies. And so this little brick structure that we see here separating the two buildings, this is the outhouse, often called here in the city a privy. And there's 58 of them that remain today, kind of tucked away in various backyards. And we find them today, well, being used for garden sheds, storage sheds. Keep your recycling and trash cans in there and things like that. But 1895 doesn't seem like a really long time ago. And so this benefit of modernization comes somewhat slowly here. It wasn't until 1851 that we actually had flowing water here in town. Up until then, we're collecting rainwater through downspouts, through cisterns. And that's where we get our drinking water. 1851, some engineers drilled a hole 2,000 feet into the surface, found themselves an aquifer with positive pressure, about 1 million gallons an hour were able to be harvested courtesy of those engineers. So 1851 is when the water started flowing here. So it doesn't seem like that long ago.
Were the privies just like basically, holes in the ground? Ultimately, and
yeah, they were somewhat a little more substantial than that. Oftentimes they would have a brick lining, and today we find these privies as little treasure troves. Amateur archaeologists, given the opportunity to dig through these privies, find all kinds of treasures in the trash pile. A lot of times folks would use the privies as garbage dumps. You find broken pieces of porcelain, broken pieces of clay pipes, maybe some buttons, coins, things like that, all trapped over time. And yeah, excavated. Must be, I want Mike Rowe to come here, and he's got this program called Dirty Jobs. Let him get dirty in a privy. I can't think of anything that's really dirtier than that. So I go to town on this amateur archaeology. Right behind me here is a structure that was built in 1804 by a group of French immigrants. Built in 1804 as Charleston's very first School for Girls. And it's all part of an organization called the South Carolina Society. The South Carolina Society, this group of French immigrants, as many immigrants did, tend to stick together, and they formed benevolent societies where at the end of the week, stuff some money into a strongbox, and if anybody ran into the rocks financially, they could pull some of this money out, get themselves reestablished and back on their feet again. Well, by the end of the Revolutionary War, we found a lot of these immigrant groups were doing pretty well on their own. They really didn't need the help of themselves or their friends, and so they started to give back to the city. Their philanthropy was towards the city as a whole, and we found the French specifically focused on education. And in 1804, the School for Girls was constructed here. And if we look at the pediment, if we take a look up at the pediment there, where we see this imagery that's on display, you've got a Latin word, posteritati. Posteritati in English translates to future generations. And we see the image of the hand holding the sapling about to go into the ground. It really tells us what education is all about. You know, you don't get an education today to immediately be employed tomorrow. You get an education for the long-range future, right? You don't plant an apple tree today thinking that you're going to pluck apples tomorrow. So it's all about the long-range future, and that's why we see that imagery of the hand with the sapling, establishing roots, establishing the future. We find that term posteritati, all engaged for future generations. A couple of blocks up, there's a neighborhood called Ansonboro. In Ansonboro, there's a street called Society Street, and on Society Street, the South Carolina Society created Charleston's very first high school, in this nature of donation and philanthropy. Let's continue up, and we can talk about, I think we're going to, holy cow, we've crested about 2 hours here. You know, I can talk and walk as long as you want. You know, as long as you want to hang out with me, I'm willing to walk and talk, and we'll likely end up things here in about 15 minutes or so. I think we're going to get to a logical conclusion for our tour.
I think that if we have 100 comments that say "Don't stop," we have to keep going.
I'm telling you what, I'm just getting my second wind here.
I mean, we were only planning to go an hour and a half, and yeah, we're just up on 2.
I'm telling you what, it's really easy to just to kind of lose track of time. Really easy to find ourselves in a position to where you know, we just really don't get lost in all this history. Certainly a lot to talk about here. We're coming up on some craftsmen, some artisans who create these beautiful baskets that are known as sweetgrass baskets. The sweetgrass baskets woven from a material, plant material that grows in a salt marsh environment. The sweetgrass isn't really woven like a traditional basket. It's actually sewn. It's a kind of corded together. The original purpose of the sweetgrass baskets was in the cultivation of rice, our #1 commodity that was generated here. And we found that the sweetgrass, having a bit of a coarse texture to it, would have separated the rice from the husk surrounding the grain. So it was a winnowing process. And after mechanical means were developed to separate the rice from its husk, we started to see these baskets being used for decorative purposes, ornamental purposes, serving pieces. These baskets will last a lifetime. They're often passed from generation to generation within a family. We'll find examples of sweetgrass baskets on display at the Smithsonian in Washington. So there's no connecting legacy from the transatlantic slave trade from West Africa to the Low Countries than these baskets. Just absolutely amazing to see. And the culture, the artistry is passed down from generation to generation, and just an amazing element of some of the displays that we find here. Even a small basket like this, would take approximately 2 to 3 days to construct. And when you take a look at, well, the price tag, I can't quite make it out on this one. Well,
Maybe it's negotiable.
perhaps it is. Usually about $50 for a basket of that size. Something a little bit larger is going to be upwards to about $400. And it reflects pretty much about the same time that it takes to to construct the basket. So just absolutely nothing more symbolistic of nothing symbolizes the Low Country more than these beautiful sweetgrass baskets. We find ourselves here presently at a rather familiar location. The location here is known as the Four Corners of Law. And the Four Corners of Law gets its name from the four buildings that make up this intersection. We find that each of the four elements of law known to man are reflected here at this intersection. And starting at the northeastern corner, we've got our City Hall. This is the second oldest continually operating city hall in the country. The oldest is that of the City Hall in Manhattan. It was originally built as a bank in 1801 and became City Hall in 1818. If you take a trip up to the first floor of City Hall, you'll find the original wrought iron teller grates, and there's a couple of big, massive bank vaults behind those teller grates that are still in place. And I'm sure there's some joke in there about City Hall, taxes, money, banks, vaults. Well, anyway, I haven't quite figured it out
Dad
yet.
joke's in there somewhere.
But yeah, I'm sure it's in there someplace. Council chambers located up on the second story, and it's also where the mayor's office is located as well. Beautiful portrait gallery there as well. Right across the street, we have America's oldest continually operating courthouse. Get that lamppost out of the way.
Sorry.
We've got that, the America's oldest continually operating courthouse from 1756 was designed by a Irish immigrant, gentleman by the name of James Hoban. And James Hoban, hey, St. Patrick's Day right around the corner. Got to give him some props. Now, President George Washington came to visit the city in May of 1791, and we still talk about the president's visit just like it was yesterday. It made a big impact on us, but the president was so impressed with the design of this building, went back to Mount Vernon, contacted Hoban to lay out the design for America's very first White House. And if you take a look at images of America's original White House, you'll see that it's a spitting image of the design right here in Charleston with our courthouse. The original White House burned to the ground by the British during the War of 1812. The second only maintains a scant resemblance of the original. Continuing, we find our city's federal building located here at the southwestern corner. The federal building here has a post office on the first floor. We've got offices of the federal marshals up on the second floor. Adjacent, there's a federal courthouse. This building replaced a jail and a police headquarters that was destroyed completely during the earthquake of 1886. This building, as we see it, was constructed in 1896. And I've always thought that if you were locked up for some sort of misdemeanor, you know, just misbehaving, you find yourselves on the night of August the 31st of 1886 behind bars, and all of a sudden the ground starts shaking at 9:50 in the evening, your misdemeanor becomes a death sentence. And it must have been an incredible experience to see the city transformed with that major earthquake of 1886. Continuing, right across the street here, coming into the sunlight, we have the beautiful steeple of St. Michael's Church, the English church, original English church here, Anglican Church, the Church of England. We find that this steeple stands at 186 feet in the air. We find that the weather vane that's up on top still does a really good job showing us which way the wind's blowing. That stands at 7.5 feet tall. And there are 8 bells located within the tower. Each of the 8 bells has a different tone associated with it. And on Sunday mornings, the St. Michael's Bell Band reads from sheets of music and plays those bells to ring tunes. So Easter time, you hear hymns, Christmas time, you hear carols, and just amazing stuff. Largest bell up there, 1,950 pounds, and it's called St. Michael. When the church is open, one of the most amazing features in the interior is a beautiful stained glass window that was donated to the church by the prominent local family, the Middleton family. They contracted Louis Comfort Tiffany to make this amazing stained glass window. And the stained glass window features Saint Michael. He's got this set of gold wings and he's got this golden halo. He's hovering over a dragon, this green dragon, and he's got this golden spear and he's about to pierce the neck of the dragon with this golden spear. It's just absolutely amazing to see. And truthfully, if I were a 10-year-old kid attending services on a Sunday morning of St. Michael's, I'd be fixated on that stained glass window the entire hour, would be transfixed on it. So what an amazing sight to see. If you have a chance just to get into St. Michael's, you won't be disappointed. It's absolutely beautiful. We're going to cross the street over here.
We've got a half dozen or so people shout out for us to keep going. Daniel Musha, Michelle, Ellen Karp says, Jim, I've enjoyed all and learned so much. You're like a Mr. Rogers for adults.
Well, welcome to my neighborhood.
More live videos.
Welcome to my neighborhood, Cousin Ellen. Get yourself a PBR and hang out for a little bit longer.
Michaela Praxis Hinunhea says, what a beautiful town. I could watch you forever.
Danke sehr.
And she gives you a winky face.
Winky. Back at ya. The City Hall, originally the bank, was designed by a local guy, a French immigrant. His name was Gabriel Manigault, and the Manigault family is still hanging around here. Our local newspaper is owned by a gentleman by the name of Pierre Manigault, so kind of French, kind of lingering longer. Gabriel Manigault had this interesting element that he would try to incorporate on all of the buildings that he constructed. The angel Gabriel, come blow that horn, has a little element of an angel that can be subliminally seen, sometimes hidden on the works of the buildings that he created. So here we've got this little angel in the form of Gabriel showing himself on the creation of the bank here. Pretty cool stuff. Kind of like a little Easter egg on the building. You know, we talked about a little bit, there were some fires that swept through the city. Had a bunch of them. You know, of course, we had some hurricanes. Had that big earthquake of 1886. And there was also another event that kind of shook us up a little bit. This series of 5 tornadoes that came ripping through the city in September of 1938. And these 5 tornadoes saw themselves touching down in various points of the city. One touchdown here. Hello, how are you today? One touchdown here today. Did some damage to City Hall. Took a car that was parked here on Broad Street and drove it into the side of St. Michael's Church. So lots of drama seen here in the city, obviously, courtesy of all of these problems. Got a beautiful tree. Got to activate, everybody press that button for your smell-o-vision. We've got this beautiful tree that's starting to show itself right now. It's called a tea olive, and the tea olive will start flowering here in the spring. It'll show itself again in the fall in October. And wow, smelling the tea olive, it is citrus. It is nothing like walking through an orange grove in Florida. Absolute delicious citrus smell. Just really amazing stuff.
Ken LeClaire asks, did the Union take over City Hall towards the end of the Civil War?
Oh yeah, so at the end of the Civil War, Charleston found itself capitulating, being taken over by the Union forces on February the 22nd of 1865. And we found that the city basically gave up. You know, they really didn't have the temerity, they didn't have the wherewithal to continue the fight. And so kind of out with a whimper rather than a roar. We've got this gentleman here, Timrod. Timrod was a poet, and not really much known about Timrod. You know, I'm sure you can find his work. He was a South Carolina laureate, and some of his stuff just doesn't appeal to me. But you know, it appealed to a 20th century artist, appealed to a guy by the name of Zimmerman. You know who Zimmerman is? Bob Dylan.
Oh, no way!
So Bob Dylan dusted off some of the works of Mr. Timrod here and decided to incorporate Timrod's works into his own works. And a couple of years ago it was found that old Bob Dylan was caught red-handed plagiarizing some of this guy's poetry.
The ultimate influence.
I'm telling you what, no such thing as an original idea, right? Here in Washington Square Park, we have this obelisk that kind of looks like the statue that we find located in Washington, D.C., the Washington Monument. This happens to be a monument that's dedicated to a local military unit, a unit called the Washington Light Infantry. And following the end of the Civil War, really didn't have much of a standing army. We had these local militia units that were sort of like a National Guard by today's standards. During the Civil War, this group, the Washington Light Infantry, fought in a number of major engagements, and at the base of the monument you find a listing of those locations in which it fought. We've got another monument established to General Beauregard. General Beauregard, who was the commander of the Confederate forces here locally. Must have been a dashing character. You know, as a matter of fact, you take a look at an image of Beauregard, he kind of looks like Clark Gable, rather dashing, rather handsome character. Washington Square Park was named Washington Square Park at the centennial, the 100th anniversary of the victory of the Battle of Yorktown. And so that decisive, conclusive battle in Virginia gave celebration. And so we established this park as Washington Square Park. Put up a big statue of George. Got George Washington there. We're not seeing the pretty side of George. You got the back of the story. And George, an imposing figure. That statue, perhaps almost lifelike. You know, George cut a rather dashing figure. George Washington, a man amongst men, stood at 6 feet 2 inches tall. Average height of a gentleman back then was right around 5'6", so he was head and shoulders amongst the rest. Weighed in at about 240 pounds, so about the size of a tight end on a professional football team today.
I think they've been kind to him.
Yes, absolutely.
He looks lighter on in this particular statue.
He had some pretty big hips. Could ride a horse pretty good, I'm sure. Now, one of my second favorite building, you know, we talked about the old Exchange, Provost Dungeon, located at East Bay and Broad Street. Running a very close second is the building here that's known as the Fireproof Building. Fireproof Building was built in 1822, and the Fireproof Building was built by, I can't read that.
Oh, sorry, Mary Beth.
Mayno, yes.
Ed and MB are saying goodbye. They have to run off. They just wanted to say goodbye to you really quick.
Bye, Mary Beth. Bye, Ed. Thanks a lot for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Sorry to interrupt you.
You're fine. You're good. You're good. But this, the Fireproof Building, was challenged by a local architect, a gentleman by the name of Robert Mills, to come up with a building that would house all of our vital records and archives. With all these fires that the city has seen, we wanted a place, a repository that would withstand any flames. And so not a single piece of wood in the construction of the Fireproof Building. The doors made out of iron, the window frames made out of iron, the door frames made out of, not a single piece of wood is seen here in the Fireproof Building. Now, you're probably familiar with a construction that was created by Robert Mills. You just probably don't know the name that's behind it. And all you have to do is pull out a $10 bill, and if you take a look at the back of a $10 bill, you'll see the U.S. Treasury building on display. It was designed and built by America's native architect and Charleston native Robert Mills. You pull the wings off of the Treasury and kind of looks like the building behind me here. Classic revival style of architecture. Looks like a Greek temple. Today, it's the home of the South Carolina Historical Society. Beautiful museum located on the first and the second floor. And up on the third floor, there's this amazing library that members and tour guides like me get to use on a regular basis. So some really great volumes and some really great works are preserved there at the South Carolina Historical Society. Well, guys, I think this brings us to a logical conclusion to our tour. Holy cow, talk about extra innings. This has been so much fun, and I could, like I say, just walk and talk all day long. I have got such a deep subject material to talk about that any corner you turn, there's always something amazing to see and something amazing to interpret for you. If you find yourselves visiting Charleston, be sure to look me up. Take a look at Low Country Walking Tours, Walks of Charleston on the World Wide Web. Check us out on TripAdvisor. You'll see that many other travelers have had a very favorable impression of us, and we certainly do enjoy those 5-star reviews. If you haven't had a chance already, hit that thumbs up button, get those endorphins flowing. Not too late to share this. Of course, this is recorded into perpetuity. We're going to be, I guess, as long as those little Google squirrels keep running those treadmills, we'll be online and able to be seen. And share it with your friends. Like I said, if you're thinking about a trip, maybe you said, holy cow, this guy's just this fountain of knowledge. I want you to introduce you to my new friend, Jim. Just click that link and forward it on. So just certainly appreciate that.
One other thing people could do is, if they haven't already hit the subscribe button, if they're watching on YouTube, hit the subscription button and turn on your bell notifications. Then anytime that we're going live again, you'll get an invitation to come and join us.
Absolutely, Chris. That is a great reminder. And as a matter of fact, this tour kind of continues. We've got Chris on this mission, this cavalcade through the country, and he's going to be finding himself in Mobile, Alabama next week.
Birmingham and Montgomery before that.
Perfect. And then also, wow, the jewel of the Gulf, New Orleans, the Crescent City. So I cannot wait to hop along on that tour as well. It's someplace that I definitely have on my bucket list to visit. I haven't been to New Orleans, and kicking myself that I haven't been there by now already, but just absolutely amazing.
And whoop. That's
hey, oh, look at that. Hey guys, thank you so much for joining me. Wow, what a pleasure, what a privilege to show you my adopted hometown, and just enjoy the rest of your Sunday afternoon, and just have a wonderful evening.
Feel free to say goodbye. We'll hang out for another couple of minutes just so to give you guys a chance as well. Ken says that we should have a margarita on them.
Ooh, I like that idea.
And I've never been through the city before, but feel like I've been there along with the nice breeze. Can't wait to visit soon. Which is exactly what we were hoping to do, which was to inspire people to whet their appetite for the visit to Charleston. Not satiate it.
Well, at the same time, I mean, this pandemic has just caused so many folks to start to think about what's going to happen when the pandemic is over, right? I got to go someplace. I want to do something. Well, add Charleston to your list and make it high on your list. I know you won't be disappointed by visiting the city.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Rob Jones. I agree. It was a great job from Jim.
Oh, thank you.
Engage, unbelievable. You have a marvelous gift and what stamina.
Yeah,
he didn't stop talking for 2 hours, guys. He didn't even take a sip of water the entire time.
I had a hearty
drank
breakfast.
The whole bottle. Rebecca, thank you. Excellent tour. Thank you so much. Michaela, as always, vielen Dank. Bis zum nächsten Mal.
Danke sehr.
She says thanks for this beautiful evening. See you again soon.
I hope so. Tschüss.
Tschüss. Everyone else out there, guys, what a pleasure. If I don't see you again sooner than later, it'll be in Montgomery or in Birmingham. There's a chance, actually, Bill Reynolds is going to do a quick golf cart tour for us in Beaufort again.
Neato.
We're back to Beaufort on Tuesday.
I love Beaufort.
And that's just a surprise. Just came in on my phone as we've been on this tour that we'll probably go do a quick visit there on the golf cart and see some more of that as well.
I like it. I like it a lot.
I honestly don't feel I don't have any envy for him. It's going to be tough to follow your act just now, Jim. I wouldn't want to be the next one up on stage. Bill, I'm not trying to scare you away. I'm just giving you the honest truth. This was an incredible experience, and I'm really, really grateful.
Well, my dear father, who's about to turn 88 on March 20th, has always told me that if you have a job that you love, it doesn't feel like work at all. So this is just a passion that I have, and I just love sharing my adopted hometown with folks, and just hope you feel the same joy I have.
Pat says, we're locked down today in Lima, but it was great to get outdoors with you today.
Cool.
This is why we're doing it. We want to make sure
Pat.
you guys have a chance to travel and escape and have some joy in your lives, especially during these tougher days. Yeah. Suzanne, Jim, so proud of my brother! Indeed. And Kristen Anderson Humphreys, come to Sonoma County.
Ooh, I like it there.
Kristen, also, I got a message from Switzerland saying that she was one of your supporters and donators today. So thank you very much.
Thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Yeah.
Herzliche.
Yeah. 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 Should we?
I
Is that
think
it?
so,
Is that a
yeah.
wrap?
I guess so.
Will you
I mean,
do the Will you do the honors?
Do I touch something?
You see that button right there up in the corner where it says end? I know you might not be able to see it entirely.
Oh
Go for
no!
it.
I don't want. I don't want to.